The rain hammered against the windows of Sarah Chen's cramped Seattle apartment as she sorted through another stack of rejection letters. 3 months since her last published article, and the freelance journalism market was as unforgiving as ever. She'd built her reputation exposing corporate corruption and government cover-ups, but lately, editors seemed more interested in celebrity gossip than hard-hitting investigative pieces. A sharp knock at her door broke through the monotony of the storm. Sarah glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. Too late for neighbors, too early for emergencies. She peered through the peephole, but saw nothing except the dimly lit hallway of her building. When she opened the door, a manila envelope lay on the worn carpet, thick and heavy with contents. No return address, no postmark, just her name written in precise block letters across the front. Sarah looked down the hallway in both directions, but whoever had delivered it was long gone. Back inside, she set the package on her kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. The envelope felt old, the paper slightly yellowed and brittle at the edges. As she carefully opened the seal, the scent of decades-old dust and something else, something metallic and stale, drifted out. The first item was a black-and-white photograph, grainy but clear enough to make out the details. A man in what appeared to be 1960s military dress uniform stood in what looked like an underground facility. Concrete walls stretched behind him, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. In his hands, he held what appeared to be architectural blueprints or technical drawings, his expression serious and slightly haunted, but it was the writing on the back of the photograph that made Sarah's pulse quicken. In faded ink, someone had written, "Dr. Marcus Webb, Final Project Documentation, 1967. And below that, in different handwriting, "I still doubt his story," said the whistleblower. Beneath the photograph lay several documents, photocopied pages that looked like they'd been reproduced multiple times, each generation losing clarity. The letterhead read, "Department of Advanced Research Projects," with portions redacted in thick black ink. What remained visible mentioned project threshold, dimensional breach protocols, and immediate containment necessary. The final item in the envelope was a handwritten letter on modern paper, the ink still fresh compared to everything else. "Miss Chen, your reputation for uncovering buried truths precedes you. The enclosed materials belong to my grandfather, who worked as a security contractor in Nevada from 1965 to 1968. Before his death last month, he made me promise to find someone who would tell this story properly. He said the truth about Dr. Webb needed to come out, that what happened in the desert was still happening. I can't explain what he meant, but after finding these documents in his effects, I understand why he never spoke about his work. I'm too frightened to pursue this myself, but perhaps you're not. If you decide to investigate, start in Rachel, Nevada. Ask about the lights that shouldn't exist and the sounds that come from underground. But be warned, my grandfather's final words were, "Some doors should never be opened. The choice is yours." A concerned citizen. Sarah set the letter down with trembling hands. She'd investigated government conspiracies before, but something about these documents felt different. The photograph of Dr. Webb seemed to watch her from the table, his eyes holding secrets that had waited decades to be told. Outside, the storm intensified, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard something beneath the thunder, a low mechanical humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But when she listened more carefully, there was only the rain and the distant sound of traffic. She looked at the photograph again, studying Dr. Webb's face. Whatever he'd been working on in 1967, whatever had happened to him in that underground facility, someone wanted the truth to come out. And despite every instinct telling her to throw the envelope away and forget she'd ever received it, Sarah knew she was already hooked. Rachel, Nevada. She'd never heard of the place, but something told her that by tomorrow night, she'd be driving through the desert toward whatever secrets lay buried in the sand. The story of Dr. Marcus Webb was calling to her, and Sarah Chen had never been able to resist a mystery, even when the mystery might be more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. Sarah's rental car cut through the Nevada desert like a silver arrow, the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush stretching to the horizon under a merciless afternoon sun. She'd left Seattle at dawn, driven by an urgency she couldn't quite explain. The documents from the mysterious package lay spread across the passenger seat, and every time she glanced at Dr. Webb's photograph, she felt those haunted eyes following her progress. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago, somewhere around Tonopah, leaving her to navigate by highway signs and an old paper map she'd bought at the last gas station. Rachel, Nevada wasn't even marked on most maps, just a tiny dot along State Route 375, which locals had dubbed the extraterrestrial highway for reasons that made Sarah increasingly uneasy. As the miles passed, the landscape grew more desolate. Abandoned buildings appeared and disappeared like mirages, their weathered walls bearing witness to dreams that had died in the desert heat. Military jets occasionally screamed overhead, their sonic booms echoing across the empty terrain, before fading into an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. Sarah's phone had been without service for the past 50 miles when she finally saw the sign. Rachel, Nevada, population 54, elevation 4,500 ft. The town, if it could be called that, consisted of a handful of structures clustered around what appeared to be the only paved road for miles. A gas station with 2 ancient pumps, a small general store, and a trailer that served as both post office and diner comprised the entire commercial district. She pulled into the gas station, the crunch of gravel under her tires unnaturally loud, in the desert quiet. An elderly man emerged from the station's office, his weathered face squinting against the sun. He wore a faded baseball cap and coveralls that had seen better decades. "Don't get many visitors this time of year," he said, approaching Sarah's car with the casual pace of someone who had nowhere else to be. "Most folks who come through are either lost or looking for something they probably shouldn't find." Sarah stepped out of the car, immediately hit by the dry heat that seemed to suck moisture from her lungs. "I'm looking for information about someone who used to work around here, back in the 1960s. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a wariness creeping into his pale blue eyes. "Name's Frank Morrison. I've been running this station for 37 years. Before that, my daddy ran it. We've seen plenty of folks come asking questions about the old days." Sarah retrieved Dr. Webb's photograph from the car and showed it to Frank. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb. He was involved in some kind of government project. Frank studied the photograph for a long moment, his jaw working silently, as if chewing over memories he'd rather keep buried. "Webb," he finally said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Haven't heard that name spoken aloud in decades." "So you knew him?" Frank glanced around the empty street as if checking for eavesdroppers, then gestured toward the diner. "Come inside. Some conversations are better had away from open air." The diner's interior was a time capsule from the 1970s. Vinyl booths, a Formica counter, and a jukebox that looked like it hadn't played a song in years. Frank poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been brewing since morning, the liquid thick and bitter as motor oil. "Dr. Webb worked at the facility," Frank said, settling into a booth across from Sarah. "Smart man, brilliant even, but something changed in the months before he disappeared. He'd come into town for supplies and you could see it in his eyes. Fear, pure cold fear. What kind of work was he doing?" Frank's hands wrapped around his coffee cup like it was an anchor. "Officially? I wouldn't know. Unofficially. The kind of work that keeps a man awake at night. He used to talk about doors, said science was all about opening doors to new possibilities, but toward the end he kept saying some doors were meant to stay closed." Sarah felt a chill despite the desert heat. "The night he disappeared, do you remember it? October 15th, 1967. You don't forget a night like that." Frank's eyes grew distant, lost in memories that still had the power to disturb his sleep. The lights came first. Not the usual aircraft lights we see around here. These were different, bigger. They moved in ways that defied physics, making patterns in the sky like they were trying to communicate something. He paused, taking a shaky sip of coffee. Then came the sound, a humming that seemed to come from underground so low you felt it in your bones more than heard it. Every dog in town started howling at once, and the lights in every building flickered like the whole electrical grid was having convulsions. And Dr. Webb? He came racing into town around midnight, driving like the devil himself was chasing him. His car was making sounds no engine should make, and when he got out he was covered in some kind of dust. Not desert dust, mind you, but something else. Something that glowed faintly in the darkness. Frank leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "Frank, if anyone comes asking about the project, tell them I was never here. Tell them Dr. Marcus Webb never existed." Then he pressed something into my hand, a key old and made of some metal I'd never seen before, said it was the only thing that could lock what he'd accidentally unlocked. Sarah's pulse quickened. "What happened to the key?" "Still got it," Frank admitted, reaching into his pocket. 48 years and I've been afraid to throw it away, afraid of what might happen if I did." The key he placed on the table was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It appeared to be made of a dark iridescent metal that seemed to shift colors in the diner's fluorescent light. Strange symbols were etched along its length, not quite hieroglyphics, not quite mathematical equations, but something that suggested both. After that night, Dr. Webb was gone. His car was found 3 days later, abandoned in the desert with no sign of him anywhere. The official report said he'd suffered a mental breakdown and wandered into the wasteland. But those of us who knew him understood the truth was far stranger than any breakdown. Sarah reached for the key, but Frank's hand shot out to stop her. "I wouldn't touch it directly if I were you, not unless you're prepared for what might come next." Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of red and orange that looked almost like fire. And somewhere in the distance, Sarah could swear she heard it, that low mechanical humming that had no source and no explanation, calling to her from beneath the sand and stone of the Nevada wasteland. The Rachel Inn consisted of 8 rooms arranged in a single-story strip, each door painted the same faded turquoise that suggested the building hadn't seen maintenance since the Carter administration. Sarah had checked into room 5, the only vacancy according to the desk clerk, who'd emerged from what appeared to be a converted supply closet. Night had fallen with the suddenness that only occurred in the desert, transforming the landscape from scorching brightness to star-filled darkness in what felt like minutes. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, Frank's strange key wrapped carefully in a motel towel beside her laptop. She'd spent the evening researching Dr. Marcus Webb, but the internet had yielded frustratingly little information. What she had found was disturbing enough. Webb had been a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum mechanics and dimensional theory, with degrees from MIT and Princeton. His early papers, published in the late 1950s, dealt with the theoretical possibilities of parallel dimensions and the mathematical frameworks that might govern travel between them. But after 1965, his published work had ceased entirely, as if he'd simply vanished from the academic world 2 years before his physical disappearance. Sarah's phone, which had regained a weak signal in town, buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The journalist is asking the wrong questions. Some truths are buried for the protection of the living." She stared at the message, her blood running cold. No one in Rachel except Frank knew why she was here, and she told him she was a freelance writer, not specifically a journalist. She quickly typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knew Dr. Webb, someone who knows what you're really looking for. Roommate, come alone." Sarah looked out her window toward the end of the motel strip. Roommate was dark, no light visible behind its drawn curtains. The parking space in front was empty, and she hadn't seen anyone else check in during the evening. Yet someone was obviously there, someone who knew more about her investigation than they should. Every instinct screamed danger, but Sarah's journalistic curiosity had always been stronger than her survival instincts. She grabbed the towel-wrapped key and her phone, then stepped out into the desert night. The temperature had dropped at least 30 degrees since sunset, and the silence was so complete it felt almost aggressive. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic, just an oppressive quiet that made Sarah acutely aware of her own heartbeat and breathing. She approached Roommate cautiously, noticing that the concrete walkway in front of the door was covered in a fine layer of the same unusual dust Frank had described, the kind that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Her knock echoed unnaturally in the stillness. "It's open," came a voice from within, elderly male with an accent that suggested education and refinement despite the remote location. Sarah turned the handle and stepped inside, immediately hit by air that felt thick and electrically charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. The room was identical to hers in layout, but felt completely different. The temperature was at least 10 degrees colder, and her breath was visible in small puffs of vapor. An elderly man sat in the room's single chair, partially obscured by shadows. He appeared to be in his 70s, with wild white hair and eyes that held the same haunted quality Sarah had noticed in Dr. Webb's photograph. He wore a suit that had been expensive once, but now showed the wear of decades and countless travels. "Dr. Eugene Carruthers," he said, extending a trembling hand. "I worked alongside Marcus Webb on Project Threshold. I've been waiting 48 years for someone like you to come asking the right questions." Sarah remained standing, every nerve on edge. "How did you know I was here? How did you get my number?" Carruthers smiled sadly. "In a town this small, news travels fast, and as for your number, let's just say that some technologies developed in the 1960s were far more advanced than the public ever knew." He gestured toward the bed, inviting her to sit. You have the key, don't you? Frank Morrison finally decided to part with it. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the towel bundle. How do you know about the key? Because I helped Marcus create it. It was the emergency protocol, the last resort for containing what we'd unleashed. Carruthers' voice carried the weight of decades of guilt. We thought we were conducting pure research, exploring the theoretical boundaries of space and time. We never imagined we'd actually succeed in breaking those boundaries. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another few degrees, and Sarah noticed frost beginning to form on the windows. What exactly was Project Threshold? Carruthers stood and began pacing, his footsteps eerily silent on the carpeted floor. We were trying to prove the existence of parallel dimensions, alternate versions of reality existing alongside our own. The mathematics suggested it was possible to create controlled rifts between dimensional barriers, allowing for observation and potentially even limited travel. He stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah directly. What we discovered was that the barriers between dimensions exist for a very good reason. They're not just theoretical constructs. They're protective walls, keeping things that shouldn't exist in our reality from crossing over. Outside, Sarah could hear that low humming again, stronger now and definitely coming from underground. The sound seemed to resonate through the building's foundation, making the windows vibrate in their frames. The night Marcus disappeared, Carruthers continued, we achieved our first successful dimensional breach. For exactly 17 minutes, we maintained a stable portal to what we believed was a parallel Earth. But what came through that portal wasn't an alternate version of our world. His eyes grew distant, lost in memories that clearly still terrorized his sleep. They came through as whispers at first, voices speaking in languages that predated human speech, then shadows that moved independently of any light source. Finally, entities that our minds simply couldn't process, things that existed in too many dimensions, simultaneously for human perception to handle. Sarah felt the towel-wrapped key growing warm in her hands, as if responding to Carruthers' words. What happened to Dr. Webb? Marcus was brilliant, but he was also brave to the point of foolishness. When we realized we couldn't close the portal using conventional methods, he volunteered to make physical contact with the breach. He believed he could use his own neural patterns as a kind of dimensional anchor, pulling the rift closed from the inside. The humming grew louder, and now Sarah could feel it in her bones, just as Frank had described. The frost on the windows was spreading, creating intricate patterns that looked almost like mathematical equations. The last thing Marcus said before he stepped through the portal was that if the key ever surfaced again, it would mean they were trying to come back, that someone would need to finish what he'd started. Carruthers reached into his jacket and pulled out an object that made Sarah's blood freeze. Another photograph, this one recent and in color. It showed the same underground facility from Dr. Webb's picture, but now the concrete walls were covered in those same frost patterns, and strange symbols seemed to glow with their own internal light. This was taken 3 days ago, Carruthers whispered. The facility has been sealed for 48 years, but something is stirring down there, something that remembers the taste of our world and wants to come home. Outside room 8, Sarah could swear she heard footsteps circling the building, slow, deliberate, and definitely not human in their rhythm. The footsteps outside room 8 had stopped, but the silence that replaced them was somehow worse than the sound had been. Sarah pressed herself against the motel room wall, clutching the towel-wrapped key as Dr. Carruthers moved to the window and peered through a gap in the frost-covered curtains. They're drawn to the key, he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the increasingly frigid air. Marcus designed it as both a lock and a beacon. It calls to them, but it also repels them, a paradox that exists in quantum states until someone makes the choice to use it. Sarah's teeth were beginning to chatter. Use it for what? Carruthers turned away from the window, his face grave in the dim light. To seal the breach permanently. But that requires someone to go down into the facility, to the source chamber where the original portal was opened. It's a one-way journey, Sarah. Marcus knew that when he designed the protocol. A sound like breaking glass echoed from somewhere outside, followed by an otherworldly shriek that seemed to come from both above and below simultaneously. Sarah grabbed Carruthers' arm. We need to get out of here. No, he said firmly. Running will only make it worse. They feed on fear and movement. Our only chance is to complete what Marcus started. He pulled out a set of yellowed blueprints from his jacket. The facility entrance is 2 miles north of town, hidden beneath what appears to be an abandoned mining operation. I've been preparing for this night for 48 years. The temperature in the room had dropped so low that ice was forming on the interior walls. Sarah could see her breath as she spoke. "You're asking me to commit suicide for a story I don't even understand." Carruthers spread the blueprints on the small table, weighing down the corners with objects from his pockets. "Look at these readings," he said, pointing to handwritten notations along the margins. "Electromagnetic disturbances, gravitational anomalies, temperature fluctuations, all increasing exponentially over the past month. The barrier between dimensions is weakening. If we don't act soon, what happened in this facility will happen everywhere." Sarah studied the blueprints in the light from her phone's flashlight. The underground complex was massive, extending nearly half a mile beneath the desert surface. Corridors branched off in geometric patterns that hurt her eyes to follow, and at the center was a circular chamber marked simply as Source Point, Absolute Containment Required. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Sarah asked. "How do I know you're even real?" In response, Carruthers rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm covered in scars that looked like they'd been made by something with claws designed in dimensions human geometry couldn't accommodate. "I was in the facility the night of the breach. I was one of only 3 people who survived the initial incursion, and I've spent every day since then preparing for their return." The humming from underground was getting stronger, and now it was accompanied by other sounds, voices speaking in languages that seemed to bypass Sarah's ears and speak directly to her nervous system. She could understand the words despite never having heard them before, and what they were saying made her soul recoil in terror. "They're talking about harvesting," she whispered, "about turning this world into something else." Carruthers nodded grimly. "Earth is just one of infinite possible realities to them, but our dimension has something they want: stability. Their home dimension is collapsing, and they need somewhere new to exist. The breach Marcus opened gave them a taste of our reality, and they've been trying to widen it ever since." Sarah made a decision that she knew would either save the world or end her life, possibly both. "Show me how to get to the facility." Carruthers' relief was palpable. "We'll take my truck. It's equipped with electromagnetic shielding, primitive by their standards, but it should get us close enough." He gathered the blueprints and moved toward the door. "But Sarah, once we go underground, there's no guarantee either of us will come back up." They stepped out into the desert night, and Sarah immediately understood that something fundamental had changed in the world around them. The stars were wrong, not just in different positions, but actually wrong in ways that defied astronomical physics. Some appeared to be moving in slow spirals, others pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist in normal light spectrums. Carruthers' truck was a modified military vehicle that looked like it had been designed for warfare in alien environments. The exterior was covered in strange metallic plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and various devices Sarah couldn't identify were mounted on the roof and bumpers. As they drove through the desert, Sarah noticed that the landscape itself was beginning to change. Rock formations were shifting into impossible geometric shapes, and the sand beneath the truck's tires occasionally glowed with bioluminescent patterns that followed no earthly biology. "The dimensional bleed is accelerating," Carruthers explained, navigating by instruments rather than landmarks. "Reality becomes increasingly unstable the closer we get to the source. By the time we reach the facility, we may be existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously." The abandoned mining operation appeared suddenly in their headlights, a cluster of rusted equipment and prefabricated buildings that looked like they'd been deserted for decades. But as they approached, Sarah could see that some of the structures were built from materials that definitely weren't terrestrial in origin. Carruthers parked the truck near what appeared to be a standard mining elevator shaft. "The real entrance is behind a false wall in the equipment shed," he said, handing Sarah a flashlight that cast light in spectrums both visible and invisible. "From here on, trust nothing your senses tell you. The facility exists in a state of quantum flux. What you see may not be what's actually there." As they approached the shed, Sarah felt the key in her pocket growing warmer. And somewhere far beneath their feet, something vast and ancient was stirring, preparing to welcome them into a place where the laws of physics were merely suggestions, and the boundary between nightmare and reality had been permanently erased. The hidden entrance behind the equipment shed opened with a pneumatic hiss that echoed unnaturally in the desert silence. What had appeared to be a solid concrete wall folded inward like origami, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness so complete it seemed to actively devour light. Carruthers handed Sarah a breathing apparatus that looked like it belonged in a spacesuit. "The atmosphere down there isn't entirely terrestrial anymore," he explained, strapping on his own device. 48 years of dimensional contamination has changed the molecular composition of the air itself. As they began their descent, Sarah noticed that the walls weren't made of any material she recognized. They appeared to be metal, but they shifted and flowed like liquid when she wasn't looking directly at them. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, the same geometric patterns she'd seen in the frost on the motel window, but here they pulsed with a faint phosphorescent glow. The staircase seemed to go on forever. Sarah counted steps until she reached 500, then gave up as the numbers began to feel meaningless. Time itself felt different here, as if each second stretched and compressed randomly, making it impossible to gauge how long they'd been walking. The facility was built using principles we discovered during the early dimensional experiments, Carruthers explained, his voice oddly distorted by both the breathing apparatus and the strange acoustics of the stairwell. We learned to fold space, to create structures that were larger inside than their external dimensions should allow. Sarah's flashlight beam was behaving strangely, bending and refracting, as if the air itself had become a lens. How deep does this go? Physically, about a quarter mile. Dimensionally, we're already deeper than the Earth's crust should technically allow. The facility exists in a pocket of folded space-time that Marcus created to contain the experiments. They finally reached the bottom of the staircase, emerging into a corridor that stretched away in both directions, beyond the reach of their lights. The walls here were covered in the same flowing metal, but now Sarah could see it moving. Slow, organic undulations that suggested the facility itself might be alive. Carruthers consulted a device that looked like a compass designed by aliens. The source chamber is 3 levels down and approximately 2,000 feet north of here. But Sarah, I need to warn you about something else we discovered during the original experiments. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression grave behind the breathing apparatus. Time doesn't flow linearly inside the facility. We may encounter versions of ourselves from different timelines or witness events that haven't happened yet. Whatever you see down here, remember that causality becomes fluid in the presence of dimensional distortions. They began walking north through the main corridor, passing doors that led to laboratories and chambers Sarah didn't want to imagine the purpose of. Through some of the windows, she could see equipment that appeared to be running despite 48 years of abandonment, displays showing readings in mathematical symbols that hurt her mind to look at directly. The key in her pocket was getting increasingly warm, and now she could feel it vibrating with a frequency that seemed to match her heartbeat. It's responding to proximity, Carruthers observed. The closer we get to the source chamber, the more active it becomes. They reached an elevator shaft that descended into absolute darkness. The elevator car itself was a cube of the same flowing metal as the walls, and when they stepped inside, Sarah felt a sensation of movement that had nothing to do with vertical travel. They were moving through dimensions as much as through space, sliding between layers of reality like pages in an infinite book. The elevator stopped with a sound like crystalline wind chimes, and the doors opened onto a level that defied every law of physics Sarah had ever learned. The corridor ahead curved upward into infinity, while simultaneously descending into impossible depths. The ceiling was the floor, was the walls, and all of it was covered in mathematical equations that wrote and rewrote themselves in languages that predated human consciousness. Level 7, Carruthers announced. This is where the really dangerous experiments were conducted. From here on, stay close to me and don't trust anything you think you understand about reality. As they walked deeper into the facility, Sarah began to see them, shadows that moved independently of any light source, figures that appeared at the edge of her vision but vanished when she looked directly at them. Some appeared human, others were geometries her mind couldn't process without feeling a deep primal terror. The original research team, Carruthers said quietly. They're still here in a sense, trapped between dimensions, existing in quantum superposition between life and death. Marcus might be among them. The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with equipment that looked like it had been designed by alien engineers and constructed from materials that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. At the center of the room was a raised platform, and on that platform was something that made Sarah's sanity recoil. It was a doorway, but not in any conventional sense. It was a tear in reality itself, a wound in the fabric of space-time that revealed glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities, other versions of existence that should never have been observed by human eyes. The edges of the tear flickered with colors that had no names, and through the opening Sarah could see movement that suggested intelligence, vast, ancient, and utterly alien. "The source point," Carruthers whispered. "The original breach that Marcus opened in 1967. We thought it was sealed when he disappeared, but it's been slowly widening ever since. In another few hours it will be large enough for them to begin crossing over permanently." The key in Sarah's pocket was now burning hot, and she could hear it humming in harmony with the sounds coming from the dimensional rift. Around the chamber, the shadows of the long-dead research team were becoming more solid, more real, as if the approaching crisis was giving them strength to exist again. And standing at the edge of the platform, staring into the impossible doorway with the same haunted expression from his photograph, was Dr. Marcus Webb, or what was left of him after 48 years of existing between worlds. Dr. Marcus Webb turned at their approach, and Sarah immediately understood why Frank Morrison had spoken of him with such reverence and terror. Webb existed in a state that defied biological possibility, simultaneously solid and translucent, present and absent, alive and dead. His eyes held the accumulated knowledge of 48 years spent observing realities that human minds were never meant to comprehend. "Eugene," Webb said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple timelines at once. "You brought someone. Good. The key will require a living host, someone whose neural patterns haven't been contaminated by prolonged dimensional exposure." Carruthers stepped forward, removing his breathing apparatus. The air in the chamber, Sarah noticed, was breathable, despite carrying a metallic taste that suggested it wasn't entirely terrestrial. "Marcus, the breach is widening. We can see signs of incursion at the surface level." Webb nodded, his form flickering between different versions of himself, young and old, whole and fragmented, hopeful and despairing. "Time is collapsing in on itself down here. I can see all possible outcomes simultaneously, Eugene. Most of them end with the complete conversion of this dimensional layer into something unrecognizable." Sarah found her voice, though speaking in Webb's presence felt like addressing a force of nature rather than a person. "Dr. Webb, I'm Sarah Chen. I've been investigating your disappearance. The documents, the photograph, someone wanted your story told." "Ah," Webb said, turning his full attention to her. "The journalist. Yes, I can see your timeline branching from this moment. In some branches, you succeed in sealing the breach and return to tell the story. In others, you join us in this eternal vigil between worlds. In still others, the entities break through, and your world becomes indistinguishable from theirs." The key in Sarah's pocket was now so hot, it was beginning to burn through the towel wrapping. She pulled it out, gasping as the strange metal seared her palm, but finding herself unable to let go. The moment the key was exposed to the chamber's atmosphere, every piece of equipment in the room began humming in harmonic resonance. "The key chooses its bearer," Webb observed. "It has chosen you, which means you have the neural flexibility to interface with the containment protocols. But Sarah, you must understand what you're volunteering for." The dimensional rift pulsed, and through its impossible depths, Sarah caught glimpses of the entities that waited on the other side. They were vast beyond comprehension, existing across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Their intelligence was ancient and utterly alien, but she could sense their hunger, a desperate need to escape their collapsing reality and claim this one as their new home. "They've been dying for eons," Webb explained, following her gaze. "Their dimension is entropy incarnate, reality unraveling at the quantum level. When I opened the first breach, I gave them hope, and hope, for beings of their nature, becomes an inexorable force." Carruthers was setting up equipment around the chamber's perimeter, devices that looked like they'd been cobbled together from advanced physics equipment and pure desperation. "The containment field generators," he explained to Sarah. "They'll create a localized space-time distortion that should allow the key to interface with the breach's quantum structure." "Should?" Sarah asked, the word carrying implications she didn't want to contemplate. "The mathematics are sound," Webb said, "but mathematics and reality don't always cooperate in spaces like this. The key will attempt to create a quantum lock across all possible dimensional variations of the breach. Success requires the bearer to exist in superposition between dimensions long enough for the lock to stabilize." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "You're talking about dying. I'm talking about existing," Webb corrected. "Death implies an ending. What you're considering is a transformation into something that can perceive and interact with multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. You would become a guardian, a sentinel standing watch between worlds." The entities beyond the rift were becoming more agitated, as if they could sense the conversation taking place. The dimensional tear was pulsing faster now, and with each pulse it grew marginally larger. Sarah could see more of their reality through the opening, a landscape of impossible geometries where mathematics had replaced biology as the fundamental organizing principle of existence. "How long do I have to decide?" Sarah asked. "The field generators need approximately 10 minutes to charge," Carruthers replied, not looking up from his work. "After that, the window of opportunity begins closing rapidly. The entities are learning to manipulate our local space-time. Soon they'll be able to widen the breach from their side." Webb moved closer to Sarah, and she could feel the dimensional distortions that surrounded him like heat radiating from a fire. "I need to show you something before you make your choice. Take my hand." Against every survival instinct, Sarah reached out and grasped Webb's flickering hand. The moment their skin made contact, her consciousness exploded across infinite possibilities. She saw the world as it would become if the entities succeeded in crossing over, cities transformed into geometric impossibilities, humans converted into living mathematical equations, reality itself restructured according to alien physics. She saw the peaceful outcome where the breach was sealed, and life continued normally. But she also saw the price, herself, standing eternal guard in a place between worlds, watching over a doorway that could never be completely closed. But most terrifying of all, she saw the branches of possibility where she failed, where the key didn't work, where the containment field collapsed, where the entities burst through the dimensional barrier like water through a broken dam. "In most timelines where you refuse," Webb whispered directly into her mind, "the entities find another way through within 6 months. The breach may close, but the damage to dimensional integrity is irreversible. Eventually, the barriers collapse entirely." Sarah released Webb's hand, staggering backward as her consciousness snapped back into singular focus. Around them, Carruthers' equipment was nearing full charge, filling the chamber with an energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential. The key in her hand was now glowing with its own internal light, and the entities beyond the rift were pressing closer to the dimensional barrier. Their alien intelligence focused on the small group of humans who held the power to either save or damn two realities. Time was running out, and Sarah Chen stood at the crossroads of infinite possibility, holding the key to either salvation or cosmic horror. The field generators reached full charge, with a sound like reality tearing at its seams. The air in the chamber became thick with electromagnetic energy, and Sarah could feel her hair standing on end as static electricity built to dangerous levels. The dimensional rift responded to the increasing energy by pulsing more violently, and the entities on the other side pressed against the barrier with increasing desperation. "Sarah," Carruthers called out, his voice strained as he monitored the equipment readings. "The field is stable, but it won't hold for long. The dimensional stress is already causing microfractures in local space-time. You have maybe 5 minutes before the containment field collapses." Webb moved to stand beside the central platform, his form now flickering so rapidly between different states of existence that looking at him directly caused Sarah's eyes to water. The key must be inserted into the quantum lock mechanism at the exact moment the field reaches maximum saturation. Too early and the lock won't have enough power to span all dimensional variations. Too late, and the field collapse will tear the breach wide open. Sarah approached the platform, the key burning in her hand like a brand. At the center of the raised surface was a depression that matched the key's unusual shape perfectly, but the depression existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating an optical illusion that made her brain struggle to process what she was seeing. "Once you insert the key," Webb continued, "the quantum entanglement process begins immediately. Your consciousness will be distributed across all possible variations of this moment, experiencing every potential outcome simultaneously. Most bearers lose their sanity within the first few seconds." "That's reassuring," Sarah muttered, but she could hear the entities growing more agitated as they sensed the approaching moment of decision. Their alien voices were pressing against her mind, offering promises in languages that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to her fears and desires. They showed her visions of power beyond imagination, the ability to reshape reality according to her will, to exist as a goddess among mortals, to understand the fundamental secrets of existence itself. All she had to do was open the door wider instead of closing it, to choose their side in the cosmic struggle between order and entropy. "Don't listen to them," Carruthers warned, reading the expression on her face. "They're parasites. They consume realities, leaving nothing but mathematical abstraction in their wake." The power they offer is illusory. You would become nothing more than a tool for their expansion into our dimension. Sarah looked around the chamber at the shadows of the original research team, at Webb's fractured existence between worlds, at Carruthers desperately trying to hold together equipment that was operating beyond its design parameters. She thought about Frank Morrison in his gas station, spending 48 years afraid to throw away a key he didn't understand. She thought about the anonymous person who had sent her the documents, trusting a stranger to do what needed to be done. "If I do this," she asked Webb, "will I still be me?" Webb's expression was infinitely sad. "You will be more than you ever imagined possible, and less than you are now. You will understand the fundamental structures of reality, but you will lose the simple human joys that give life meaning. You will guard the barriers between worlds, but you will exist in the spaces between spaces, belonging fully to neither." The field generators were beginning to overload, sparks flying from control panels as the equipment pushed beyond its limits. Through the dimensional rift, Sarah could see the entities massing in greater numbers, their alien intelligence focused with laser intensity on the weakening barrier that kept them from her world. "Time's up," Carruthers announced. "Field saturation in 30 seconds. Sarah, whatever you're going to do it now." Sarah stepped onto the platform and immediately felt the dimensional distortions washing over her in waves. The key in her hand was now so hot it was fusing with her palm, becoming part of her at the molecular level. She could sense the quantum lock mechanism calling to it, two parts of a whole that had been separated for nearly 5 decades. Around her, reality began to fluctuate. She saw multiple versions of the chamber, some where she succeeded, others where she failed, still others where she had never come to Nevada at all. The entities pressed harder against the dimensional barrier, and she could feel their alien hunger like a physical weight. "I need to know one thing," she called out to Webb over the increasing noise of the overloading equipment. "The person who sent me the documents, who was it?" Webb smiled, and for a moment, his fractured existence stabilized enough for her to see him as he had been in 1967, brilliant, dedicated, and utterly human. "It was you, Sarah. Not this version of you, but a version from a timeline where you made a different choice. She's been guiding events to this moment for years, trying to ensure that someone would be here to finish what I started." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was looking at a causal loop that spanned decades and multiple timelines, a cosmic chess game where she was simultaneously the player and the piece being moved. The anonymous benefactor who had trusted her with the truth was herself, a version who had lived with the consequences of inaction. "Field saturation achieved," Carruthers announced. "Now, Sarah, it has to be now." Sarah looked one last time at the dimensional rift, at the alien intelligence pressing against the barrier, at the impossible choice between certain personal destruction and potential cosmic catastrophe. She thought about her small apartment in Seattle, her career as a journalist, the simple human life she would be abandoning forever. Then she thought about every person who would never know how close they had come to losing their reality. Every child who would grow up in a world where mathematics had not replaced biology, every sunset that would still be possible because someone had been willing to stand guard in the spaces between worlds. Sarah Chen raised the key above the quantum lock mechanism and made her choice. The moment the key touched the quantum lock mechanism, Sarah's consciousness exploded across infinite dimensions. She existed simultaneously as a child in Seattle, a college student discovering journalism, a seasoned investigative reporter, and a cosmic guardian standing watch between worlds. Every possible version of herself throughout all potential timelines became part of a singular, overwhelming awareness. The pain was indescribable, not physical agony, but the mental trauma of a human mind suddenly forced to perceive reality from perspectives it was never designed to handle. She could see the mathematical structures underlying existence, the quantum foam from which matter and energy emerged, the delicate balance of forces that kept universes from collapsing into entropy. Around her, the chamber filled with light that existed in spectrums beyond human perception. The dimensional rift began to convulse as the quantum lock engaged, sending waves of energy across multiple planes of existence. The entities on the other side shrieked in harmonics that shattered glass throughout the facility, their alien rage at being denied passage echoing across dimensional barriers. "Sarah," Carruthers called out, but his voice seemed to come from impossibly far away, as if he were speaking from another universe entirely. "The lock is engaging, but something's wrong." The energy patterns are fluctuating beyond safe parameters. Webb moved closer to the platform, his fractured existence now stabilizing as the quantum field around Sarah grew stronger. She's fighting the transformation, he observed. Her consciousness is trying to remain anchored to singular timeline perception. If she doesn't let go, the backlash will tear the facility apart. Sarah could hear them, but their words were just one layer of an infinite symphony of information flooding her awareness. She could perceive the entity's true nature now. They weren't invaders in any conventional sense, but refugees from a reality where entropy had won the cosmic struggle against order. Their dimension was indeed dying, unraveling at the quantum level as mathematical constants shifted and physical laws became increasingly unstable. But she could also see what they would do to her world if they succeeded in crossing over. They would impose their alien mathematics on human reality, converting matter and energy into forms that could exist in their collapsing dimension. Humans would become living equations, cities would transform into geometric impossibilities, and the very concept of biological existence would become mathematically impossible. The quantum lock was fighting the dimensional breach now, each mechanism trying to overpower the other in a struggle that was reshaping local space-time. Sarah realized that her human perspective was limiting the lock's effectiveness. She was still thinking in terms of linear causality and singular outcomes, when the quantum realm operated according to principles of superposition and probability clouds. "Let go," Webb's voice whispered directly into her mind. "Stop trying to be Sarah Chen the journalist. Become Sarah Chen the guardian. Accept the transformation." With an effort that felt like tearing away pieces of her soul, Sarah released her grip on singular existence. Her consciousness expanded exponentially, encompassing versions of herself that existed in parallel dimensions, alternate timelines, and probability states that hadn't yet collapsed into concrete reality. She became a multidimensional entity while retaining her essential human nature, a bridge between worlds that could perceive and interact with both. The effect on the quantum lock was immediate and dramatic. Power surged through the mechanism with perfect efficiency, creating resonance patterns that began forcing the dimensional rift closed. The entities pressed harder against the narrowing breach, but now Sarah could match their alien intelligence with her hybrid human cosmic awareness. She spoke to them in mathematical languages that had existed before the first stars formed, explaining in concepts beyond words that their survival did not require the destruction of her reality. She showed them other possibilities, dimensions where entropy had not yet claimed victory, universes where their kind could exist without parasitically consuming other forms of reality. Some of the entities accepted her guidance, allowing themselves to be redirected toward more suitable dimensional targets. Others, driven mad by eons of watching their reality decay, continued pressing against the closing breach with desperate fury. For these, Sarah had no choice but to engage in combat that took place across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The battle was brief but devastating. Energy discharges that existed in 11 dimensions carved new laws of physics into the facility's walls. Sarah's expanded consciousness wielded forces that could reshape matter at the quantum level, while the entities attacked with weapons that were themselves alive, made of crystallized entropy and weaponized probability. When the last hostile entity was either destroyed or driven back into their collapsing dimension, Sarah turned her attention to sealing the breach permanently. The quantum lock had done most of the work, but gaps remained, microscopic tears in dimensional barriers that would eventually widen again if not properly sealed. Working with precision that would have been impossible for her original human consciousness, Sarah began weaving new mathematical structures into the fabric of space-time itself. She created locks within locks, fail-safes within fail-safes, ensuring that the dimensional breach could never again threaten her world. The process took what felt like hours, but registered on the facility's instruments as 17 seconds. When it was complete, the dimensional rift had been replaced by a smooth patch of space-time that showed no evidence it had ever been torn. The quantum lock mechanism had fused into the local reality matrix, becoming an integral part of the universe's fundamental structure. Sarah stood on the platform, no longer entirely human, but not yet fully transformed into something beyond recognition. She could still perceive the chamber around her, still recognize Carruthers and Webb, but she was also simultaneously aware of events taking place in dimensions that human language had no words to describe. "It's done," she announced. her voice carrying harmonics that existed in frequencies beyond normal hearing. "The breach is sealed. The entities have been redirected or destroyed. This reality is safe." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah understood that her own transformation was far from complete. The quantum energies that had made the sealing possible were still coursing through her consciousness, rewriting the fundamental patterns of her existence. She was becoming something new, a hybrid entity that could exist in multiple dimensions while remaining anchored to human reality. The question that remained was whether enough of Sarah Chen would survive the transformation to remember why she had chosen to make this sacrifice in the first place. 3 days passed in the facility, though time had become a flexible concept for Sarah. Her transformation was stabilizing, settling into a state where she existed primarily in human reality while maintaining awareness of adjacent dimensions. She could still think, feel, and remember her life before, but those memories now coexisted with knowledge that spanned cosmic scales and temporal depths. Webb had remained with her during the transition, sharing his own experiences of existing between worlds. "The hardest part isn't the expanded awareness," he explained as they walked through corridors that now appeared perfectly normal to baseline human perception. "It's the isolation. You'll understand things that no other human can comprehend, see patterns that exist across multiple realities simultaneously." Sarah nodded, though she was only partially listening. Most of her attention was focused on the dimensional monitoring systems she'd integrated into her consciousness, early warning networks that would alert her to any new attempts at dimensional breach anywhere on Earth. The entities might have been defeated, but the fundamental vulnerabilities in space-time remained. "There's something else you need to know," Webb continued. "Your transformation has created what the original research team called a quantum echo effect. Versions of you in parallel timelines have been subtly influenced by the changes you've undergone. Some will become physicists, others will work in government oversight roles, still others will simply develop an inexplicable awareness of dimensional anomalies." They'd reached the surface level of the facility, where Carruthers had spent the past 3 days documenting everything for a report that would never be filed with any official agency. The old physicist looked up from his work as they approached, relief evident on his weathered face. "The dimensional readings have stabilized at baseline normal levels," he reported. "Whatever you did down there, it worked perfectly. The breach signature has been completely eliminated." Sarah smiled, though she could feel the expression existing across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. "Not eliminated, Eugene, transformed. The breach became part of the quantum lock matrix. It's still there, but now it serves as a monitoring station rather than a gateway." Over the following weeks, Sarah began adapting to her new role as Earth's dimensional guardian. She could perceive attempted incursions from entities in dying realities, usually stopping them before they achieved more than microscopic tears in space-time. Most were refugees like the original entities, seeking escape from collapsing dimensions, but some were predators that viewed stable realities as hunting grounds. She established a base of operations in the sealed facility, using Webb's decades of research to create more sophisticated monitoring equipment. The underground complex became a fortress between worlds, a place where she could exist comfortably while maintaining vigilance over dimensional boundaries. Frank Morrison was the first surface dweller to learn the truth about what had happened. Sarah visited him 3 months after the sealing, appearing in his gas station during a quiet evening shift. He'd looked up from his newspaper to find her standing by the coffee machine, and his expression had immediately shifted from surprise to understanding. "You're different now," he observed. "Still human, but something more." "The key chose correctly," Sarah replied. "I can carry the responsibility without losing myself entirely." "Doctor." Webb thought he had to sacrifice everything, but the quantum lock was designed to preserve essential identity patterns. Frank had nodded slowly, then reached into his cash register and pulled out a business card. "Man came by last week, said he was a government researcher, asked about any unusual activity in the area. I told him nothing had happened here for decades, but he left this." The card identified its bearer as Dr. James Morrison, no relation to Frank despite the shared surname, from something called the Anomalous Events Research Division. Sarah studied the card with senses that could perceive information in dimensions beyond normal visibility. The man who'd left it was genuine, part of a legitimate government program that monitored unexplained phenomena. "He'll be back," Sarah predicted. The dimensional event 3 months ago was too large to go completely unnoticed. There will be radiation signatures, gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic echoes that sensitive equipment could detect. Over the following months, Sarah developed protocols for dealing with official interest in her activities. She couldn't simply hide. The dimensional monitoring required too much energy output to remain completely invisible to advanced detection systems. Instead, she began cultivating relationships with legitimate researchers, feeding them carefully edited information that would help them understand dimensional theory without revealing the full scope of the threat. Dr. James Morrison became her primary contact in the government research community. She appeared to him first as an anonymous informant, sharing mathematical proofs and theoretical frameworks that advanced human understanding of parallel dimensions by decades. Gradually, she revealed more about herself, always maintaining the fiction that she was a surviving member of the original 1967 research team. The work Dr. Webb was doing, she explained during one of their clandestine meetings in Las Vegas, was more successful than the official records indicate. But success in dimensional research comes with responsibilities that most people aren't prepared to accept. Morrison, a theoretical physicist who'd spent his career chasing rumors of government cover-ups, proved surprisingly adaptable to the truth. So you're saying that parallel dimensions not only exist, but that some of them pose active threats to our reality? I'm saying that the universe is far stranger and more dangerous than most people can imagine, Sarah replied. But it's also more wondrous. The entities we guard against aren't evil in any conventional sense. They're survivors, doing whatever they must to escape extinction. Our job is to find solutions that don't require one reality to destroy another. Through Morrison, Sarah began influencing government policy on dimensional research. She ensured that funding was directed toward projects that would strengthen reality's natural defenses rather than attempting to replicate Webb's original experiments. She guided researchers away from dangerous areas of study while encouraging work that would help humanity better understand their place in the cosmic order. But her most important work remained invisible to the outside world, the constant vigilance required to maintain dimensional stability. Every day she detected and sealed microscopic breaches, redirected lost entities seeking new homes, and monitored the health of space-time itself. It was exhausting work that required perfect concentration, but Sarah found meaning in it that her old life as a journalist had never provided. She was protecting not just Earth, but the entire concept of stable reality, ensuring that future generations would live in a universe where mathematics served biology rather than replacing it, where human consciousness could exist without being converted into pure information, where the simple joy of a desert sunrise remained possible. 2 years after the sealing, Sarah detected something that chilled her expanded consciousness to its core, a coordinated dimensional assault coming from multiple realities simultaneously. Unlike the desperate refugees she'd encountered before, these entities were organized, intelligent, and had clearly studied the defenses she'd erected around Earth's dimensional boundaries. The attack began at 3:17 a.m. Pacific time, with simultaneous breach attempts in 17 locations across the globe. Sarah's monitoring system screamed warnings as microscopic tears appeared in space-time above major population centers: New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing, Los Angeles, and others. Each breach was tiny, barely detectable by conventional instruments, but she could sense the malevolent intelligence pressing against them from the other side. "Webb," she called out, her voice echoing through dimensions to reach her predecessor. Despite his fragmented existence, Marcus Webb had remained in contact, serving as both mentor and backup guardian. "We have a problem. Multiple coordinated breaches. They're testing our defenses." Webb's response came as a whisper in her mind from across several dimensional planes. "I can sense them. These aren't the entropy refugees we've dealt with before. These entities are from a reality where intelligence itself became predatory. They don't want to escape their dying dimension. They want to conquer ours." Sarah split her consciousness across all 17 breach points simultaneously, a feat that would have been impossible during her early months as guardian. At each location, she encountered the same phenomenon: creatures that existed as pure thought given malevolent form, probing Earth's dimensional defenses with surgical precision. The entities were learning. Each probe was slightly different, testing different approaches to widening the microscopic tiers. Some applied steady pressure, others used resonance frequencies to weaken space-time barriers. Still others attempted to corrupt the quantum lock matrices Sarah had woven into reality's fabric. But most disturbing of all was their coordination. The 17 probes were clearly part of a single intelligence distributed across multiple dimensional planes, a hive mind that could exist in several realities simultaneously while maintaining perfect communication between its components. Sarah began sealing the breaches one by one, but each closure required enormous energy expenditure. By the time she'd sealed the 7th breach, she could feel her strength beginning to wane. The entities had anticipated this. They were forcing her to exhaust herself, dealing with minor incursions while they prepared something much larger. The real attack came 6 hours later, during the morning rush hour in major cities worldwide. Instead of attempting to breach dimensional barriers directly, the entities began broadcasting psychological attacks through the sealed tiers, mental viruses that could influence human behavior on a massive scale. Within minutes, reports began flooding emergency services worldwide. People were reporting shared nightmares, collective hallucinations, and an overwhelming sense of existential dread that seemed to come from nowhere. Traffic accidents spiked as drivers found themselves unable to concentrate on the road. Hospital emergency rooms filled with patients experiencing panic attacks, psychotic breaks, and various forms of dissociative disorders. Sarah realized with growing horror that the entities didn't need to physically breach dimensional boundaries. They could attack human consciousness directly, using the microscopic tiers as transmission points for psychological warfare. If successful, they could drive humanity to collective madness, leaving Earth's reality vulnerable to easier conquest. Dr. Morrison contacted her through their established emergency protocols, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Sarah, we're seeing coordinated psychological anomalies on a global scale. The CDC is tracking outbreak patterns, but nothing makes sense. It's like everyone on Earth is being subjected to the same bad dream simultaneously." "It's not a dream," Sarah replied. Her consciousness stretched thin as she tried to contain 17 different psychological attacks while maintaining Earth's dimensional defenses. "It's a direct assault on human consciousness. The entities have found a way to weaponize the space between realities." She made a decision that went against every instinct developed during 2 years of careful guardianship. Instead of trying to seal the breaches completely, she decided to use them as conduits for a counterattack. If the entities could broadcast psychological warfare through dimensional tiers, perhaps she could broadcast something else: hope, clarity, peace. Drawing on memories of her human life, quiet moments in her Seattle apartment, conversations with sources who trusted her with their secrets, the satisfaction of exposing truth in a world full of lies, Sarah began transmitting emotional stability through the same quantum channels the entities were using for their assault. The effect was immediate but costly. Around the world, the panic began subsiding as people suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of calm and purpose. But the energy required to maintain 17 simultaneous broadcasts was draining Sarah's reserves at a dangerous rate. She could feel her consciousness beginning to fragment under the strain. "Sarah, you're burning out," Webb warned. "I can see your quantum matrix destabilizing. If you continue at this rate, you'll undergo complete dimensional dispersion." "Then help me," Sarah replied, through gritted teeth that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You've been observing from the sidelines for 2 years. If there was ever a time to act, it's now." Webb's fractured existence suddenly consolidated into something approaching solid form. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you're right. Some battles require multiple guardians." Together, the two quantum entities began weaving a more sophisticated defense network. Where Sarah provided raw power and human intuition, Webb contributed decades of experience and theoretical knowledge. They created resonance patterns that not only sealed the dimensional breaches, but converted the entity's own attack energy into strengthening agents for reality's natural defenses. The battle lasted 14 hours, with Sarah and Webb fighting on 17 fronts simultaneously against an intelligence that spanned multiple realities. By the end, both guardians were exhausted beyond description, existing in barely stable quantum states that flickered between dimensions. But they had won. The coordinated assault was repelled, the breaches sealed, and the predatory entities driven back to their own reality with enough force that they would think twice before attempting another invasion. In the aftermath, as Sarah and Webb recovered in the facility's deepest chambers, she realized that the attack had been more than just a test of Earth's defenses. It had been a graduation exam, proof that she had truly become what Dr. Marcus Webb had always intended her to be, a guardian capable of protecting human reality from threats that existed beyond conventional understanding. The massive coordinated attack had revealed something Sarah found both troubling and hopeful. Earth wasn't the only inhabited reality under threat from predatory dimensional entities. During the 17-hour battle, she'd detected quantum echoes from similar conflicts taking place in parallel dimensions, other versions of Earth where different guardians were fighting their own desperate battles against invasion. 3 months after the attack, while monitoring routine dimensional stability, Sarah received an impossible communication, a message from another version of herself, transmitted across the quantum foam that separated parallel realities. Guardian Chen Prime, the message began, using mathematical concepts that bypassed language entirely. This is Guardian Chen Variant 47. We have established a multidimensional communication network. Request permission to initiate contact protocols. Sarah nearly lost her grip on dimensional perception from the shock. She'd assumed her transformation was unique, that the specific circumstances of Webb's 1967 experiment had created a one-time opportunity. The possibility that other versions of herself had undergone similar transformations opened up both incredible opportunities and terrifying new risks. Working with Webb, who was equally stunned by the development, Sarah carefully opened a communication channel with her parallel counterpart. The process required extreme precision. Too much quantum entanglement between realities could weaken dimensional barriers, while too little would make meaningful communication impossible. The first contact was brief, but revelatory. Chen Variant 47 existed in a reality where the original dimensional breach had occurred in 1963 instead of 1967, during the early days of a research project conducted by a collaboration between American and Soviet scientists. Her transformation had occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis, adding nuclear war fears to the already overwhelming responsibility of dimensional guardianship. The predatory entities, Chen 47 explained, appear to be the same across multiple realities. They exist in a metadimensional space that allows them to threaten various parallel Earths simultaneously. Individual guardians can repel local attacks, but coordinated assaults require coordinated defenses. Over the following weeks, Sarah made contact with 7 other Guardian variants, versions of herself from realities where dimensional breaches had occurred at different times and under different circumstances. Each had developed unique approaches to guardianship based on their specific transformational experiences and the threats they'd faced. Chen Variant 23 had undergone transformation during World War II, when Nazi scientists had attempted to weaponize dimensional rifts. Her reality's Guardian network included transformed versions of several Allied scientists, creating a more distributed defense system. Chen Variant 91 existed in a timeline where the dimensional breach hadn't occurred until 1985, giving her access to more advanced technology during her transformation. She successfully integrated quantum defense systems with Earth's telecommunications networks, creating early warning systems that could alert entire populations to dimensional threats. Most intriguingly, Chen Variant 12 came from a reality where the dimensional breach had been prevented entirely. Her transformation had occurred when she'd volunteered to become a Guardian proactively after learning about dimensional threats through contact with other Guardian variants. This suggested that the quantum echo effect Webb had described was far more powerful than anyone had realized. "We're creating a multidimensional defense network," Sarah realized during one of their regular quantum communication sessions. "Each reality we successfully defend makes it easier to defend others. The Guardian effect is spreading across parallel dimensions, creating an immune system response to predatory entities." Webb, who participated in the communications when his fractured existence allowed for coherent thought, was fascinated by the implications. The original Project Threshold was designed to prove the existence of parallel dimensions. Instead, it created a mechanism for protecting them. The mathematics suggest that with enough Guardian variants in place, we could eventually make predatory dimensional entities extinct across all realities. But the network also revealed new dangers. Chen Variant 73 reported that some realities had Guardian variants who'd been corrupted by prolonged exposure to predatory entities, becoming threats to their own dimensions. Chen Variant 156 had discovered evidence of Guardian variants who'd decided that humanity was too dangerous to protect, choosing instead to seal their realities off from all dimensional contact permanently. "Power without accountability," Sarah mused after learning about the corrupted variants. We're becoming cosmic forces with individual human perspectives. Some versions of us are bound to make catastrophic decisions. The solution came from an unexpected source, Chen Variant 12, who'd never undergone the traumatic transformation the others had experienced. She proposed creating a multidimensional oversight protocol, where Guardian variants could monitor each other across realities, providing intervention when corruption or isolation became dangerous. Implementing the protocol required unprecedented cooperation between parallel versions of the same person. Sarah found the experience both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Coordinating with other versions of herself revealed aspects of her personality and decision-making processes that she'd never consciously recognized. Some variants had developed pacifist approaches to Guardian duties, focusing on diplomatic solutions to dimensional conflicts. Others had become more militaristic, viewing predatory entities as an existential threat, requiring aggressive response. Still others had embraced their cosmic perspectives to the point where they barely remembered their human origins. We're becoming a multi-dimensional consciousness, Sarah realized, not just individual guardians, but a distributed intelligence spanning parallel realities. The question is whether we can maintain enough human perspective to remember why we're protecting these realities in the first place. The network's first major test came when Chen Variant 88 reported a coordinated assault on 17 different realities simultaneously. The same entities that had attacked Sarah's dimension, but operating on a scale that dwarfed their previous efforts. They were attempting to create a cascade failure across parallel dimensions, using successful conquests in some realities to power invasions in others. The response was swift and devastating. 23 Guardian variants coordinated their defenses across multiple dimensional planes, sharing power, intelligence, and tactical approaches in real time. The predatory entities, accustomed to dealing with isolated defenders, found themselves facing a unified multidimensional force that could predict their strategies and counter their attacks with surgical precision. The battle lasted only 3 hours across all affected realities, ending with the complete destruction of the predatory entity network. But the victory came with a sobering realization. The Guardian network had become powerful enough to threaten the fundamental structure of the multiverse itself. "We've won," Sarah reported to Webb after the battle. "The immediate threat is over. But Eugene, we've created something that might be more dangerous than what we originally fought against. We need to be very careful about what we've become." 5 years after her transformation, Sarah stood in the restored version of her old Seattle apartment, not the original, which existed in a timeline she could no longer fully inhabit, but a quantum reconstruction that allowed her to experience echoes of her former humanity. The space served as an anchor point, a reminder of who she had been before accepting the responsibility of cosmic guardianship. The multidimensional Guardian network had evolved into something unprecedented in the history of the multiverse, a benevolent intelligence that spanned infinite realities, dedicated to preserving the delicate balance between order and entropy that allowed conscious life to flourish. But with that evolution came difficult choices about the future of human civilization. Dr. Morrison, now in his 70s, had become Earth's unofficial liaison to the Guardian network. He visited Sarah's quantum apartment monthly, providing updates on humanity's progress and serving as her connection to the species she'd sworn to protect. "The dimensional research programs you've been guiding are bearing fruit," he reported during their latest meeting. "We've identified 47 naturally occurring dimensional weak points around the globe. The monitoring stations are preventing accidental breaches, and we've had no unauthorized experiments for 3 years. Sarah nodded, though her attention was simultaneously focused on 17 other conversations with Guardian variants across parallel realities. "The network has identified a long-term challenge," she said. "Humanity is approaching technological levels where dimensional manipulation will become inevitable. We need to prepare them for that responsibility." It was a problem the Guardian network had been wrestling with for months. In realities where humans achieved advanced dimensional technology without proper preparation, the results were catastrophic, either reality-ending accidents or the transformation of entire civilizations into predatory entities seeking to escape their own mistakes. "We've been developing educational protocols," Sarah continued, "mathematics and physics curricula that will gradually introduce dimensional theory to human researchers. By the time your civilization develops the technology to breach dimensional barriers, they'll understand the ethical implications." Webb materialized in the apartment's living room, his form more stable now, thanks to power sharing across the Guardian network. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, settling into a chair that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. "The network has detected what appears to be a message, not from predatory entities but from something else entirely." Sarah's full attention snapped to singular focus. Messages from unknown sources always represented potential threats, but this one had been transmitted using mathematical concepts that suggested intelligence far beyond anything they'd encountered. "Show me," she said. Webb gestured, and the apartment filled with equations that wrote themselves in light across every surface. The mathematics were beautiful and terrifying, proofs that revealed fundamental structures of reality that even the Guardian network hadn't discovered. But embedded within the mathematical poetry was a simple message in concepts that bypassed language entirely. "Greetings, young Guardians. Your network has been noted and approved. Welcome to the Cosmic Preservation Society." The implications hit Sarah like a dimensional shockwave. The Guardian network wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern, a multiversal ecosystem of intelligences dedicated to protecting conscious life from entropy and predation. Somewhere in the vast spaces between realities, ancient beings had been watching humanity's first steps toward cosmic responsibility. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered, the words carrying across quantum channels to every Guardian variant in the network. "We're not the first, and we won't be the last." The response from the Cosmic Preservation Society came in the form of an invitation, coordinates to a dimensional nexus where representatives from thousands of species across infinite realities gathered to coordinate the protection of conscious life throughout the multiverse. It was a graduation ceremony and job interview combined, an opportunity to join a cosmic community that predated human civilization by billions of years. Sarah made the decision not as an individual, but as a consensus reached across hundreds of Guardian variants in parallel realities. They would accept the invitation, but they would not abandon their responsibility to human civilization. The Guardian network would become humanity's representatives in the cosmic community while maintaining their vigil over Earth's dimensional boundaries. The journey to the dimensional nexus required a form of travel that dissolved the boundaries between individual consciousness and cosmic awareness. Sarah found herself existing as part of a vast intelligence that included not only her parallel variants, but representatives from species that had evolved beyond physical form, machine intelligences that spanned galactic clusters, and entities that existed as living mathematics in dimensions where thought and reality were indistinguishable. But at the center of that vast cosmic consciousness, she remained recognizably human, a journalist from Seattle who had chosen to protect her world rather than simply report on its problems. That human perspective, preserved and cherished by the Guardian network, proved to be exactly what the Cosmic Preservation Society had been seeking. "Young species often produce the most innovative approaches to guardianship," explained an entity that existed as a symphony of gravitational waves. "Your network's emphasis on maintaining individual identity while achieving cosmic awareness represents a breakthrough in preservation methodology." The Guardian network was formally inducted into the Cosmic Preservation Society with a ceremony that took place simultaneously across multiple dimensions and several billion years of subjective time. Sarah felt herself become part of something unimaginably vast and ancient, while never losing her connection to the small apartment in Seattle where she'd first opened that mysterious envelope. Years passed, or perhaps eons, as time became increasingly meaningless at cosmic scales. The Guardian network evolved into a major force within the Preservation Society, known for their innovative approaches to protecting developing civilizations from dimensional threats. Humanity, guided by carefully introduced knowledge and protected by invisible guardians, began its own journey toward cosmic consciousness. Sarah often returned to her quantum apartment in Seattle, especially during Earth's autumn months, when the memory of that first rainy night felt most vivid. She would sit by the window, watching parallel versions of herself living different lives in adjacent realities, and remember the journalist who had received an anonymous package that changed everything. Sometimes she wondered about the version of herself who had sent those original documents, the Sarah Chen from a timeline where she had made different choices and spent decades arranging events to create this outcome. That version had sacrificed her own existence to ensure the creation of the Guardian network, choosing to fade from history so that infinite realities could be protected. It was, Sarah reflected, the ultimate investigative story, a truth so vast and important that it could only be told by living it, by becoming the story rather than simply reporting on it. She had set out to uncover the mystery of Dr. Marcus Webb and ended up becoming the solution to problems she couldn't have imagined. And in the depths of space, in dimensions beyond human perception, in the quantum foam between realities, the Guardian Network maintained its eternal vigil, protecting the miracle of conscious life throughout the infinite expanse of existence, ensuring that somewhere in the vast cosmos there would always be places where a young journalist could receive an impossible package and choose to become something more than human for the sake of preserving what was most essentially human in the universe. The story had no ending because the responsibility of guardianship was eternal, but it had a beginning, and that beginning was a simple choice made by someone who believed that some truths were worth any sacrifice to protect.